Let me paint you a picture. You are Aaliyah Boston. You are a three-time WNBA All-Star, a former Rookie of the Year, one of the most technically polished post players in the entire league, and arguably the second most important piece of the most watched team in women's professional basketball. You have spent 2.5 seasons carrying yourself with professionalism, class, and restraint in front of every camera, every microphone, and every reporter who has ever put a question to you. And then you sit down at a post-game press conference in San Francisco after a 2-point loss that you know, that everyone watching knows, was influenced by officiating decisions that had no business being made. And you do not perform diplomatic disappointment. You do not offer the usual, "We just have to execute better down the stretch" routine. You look into the camera and you say with absolute precision that you think it is super hard to get charge fouls called when you do not think anyone is in legal guarding position. And then you said, and again, this is Aliyah Boston, the calm one, the professional one. Shout out to the Valks. They did a great job selling it and the ref bought it, to be honest. Welcome to Street Hoops. I'm Dre Fiver. And tonight, we are going frame by frame through the most criminally underreported story of the Indiana Fever's 2026 season. Because the officiating in that Chase Center building on May 28th was not just inconsistent. It was a theft. And Aliyah Boston just filed the police report. Let's establish context first, because this game did not arrive in a vacuum. 6 days before the May 28th rematch at Chase Center, the Indiana Fever hosted the Golden State Valkyries in Indianapolis, and that game set the temperature for everything that followed. That first matchup was not physical in the way that every WNBA game has contact. It was grab her, hold her, elbow her. Caitlin Clark left Gainbridge Fieldhouse with visible scratch marks on her arms from 40 minutes of Golden State defenders treating her less like a player to be guarded and more like a problem to be worn down. There was a moment before halftime in that game where Clark and Janelle Salon got into it, both picking up technical fouls, and the temperature in the building was not frustrated at a bad call tension. It was about to boil tension. The kind where one more thing tips the whole situation over. Clark still put up 22 points, 4 three-pointers, and a logo shot. The Fever won 90-82, but head coach Natalie Nakase of the Valkyries was not embarrassed by that loss. She was taking notes. She had a plan. She has been explicit all season about what that plan looks like. Get physical with Clark, be disruptive, because as Nakase put it, Clark can shoot from half court, so you simply cannot give her any air at all. When the rematch landed on the schedule for May 28th in San Francisco, everybody on both sidelines knew exactly what kind of game it was going to be. The Fever arrived in San Francisco already dealing with Clark's back, which had her listed as probable on the injury report going into a 10 o'clock tip-off on the road. The crowd at Chase Center was going to be fully against them. No traveling Fever faithful to provide the comfort zone Indiana usually plays with. And Veronica Burton was going to be in Clark's face from the opening tip with zero relief coming. Burton, Tiffany Hayes, and the length of Golden State's entire defensive rotation for 40 minutes with a bad back. None of that ended up being the worst part of Indiana's night. The worst part was the officiating, and it started early, and it started with Aliyah Boston, and it did not stop. Boston is the engine of Indiana's interior operation. When she is on the floor and healthy, the Fever run an inside-out attack that is genuinely difficult to game plan for. Boston holds the paint, draws defenders, and Clark operates in space. When Boston is on the bench in foul trouble, that entire architecture collapses. The paint packs in, Clark catches the ball on the wing with nowhere to go, and Golden State's length takes over. Golden State knew this, and whether it was by design or by fortune, the officiating in the first half effectively handed them exactly the outcome they needed. Boston picked up 4 fouls in 22 minutes of play, and at least 3 of them were charge calls. Now here is what a charge call actually requires. The defender has to be set, in legal guarding position, with both feet planted and her torso squared, before the offensive player begins their move. That is the standard. That is the rule. When you go back and watch the replays from Boston's foul trouble in this game, what you see is the exact opposite. Defenders still moving when the whistle blows. Bodies already falling backward before Boston's weight even transfers into the contact. Feet still in motion when the call is made. That is not a charge. That is, in Boston's own accurate description, a performance. And the performers in question were doing it on a loop against the same player, in the same game, in front of 3 different referees who kept buying the show. Boston said after the game that she was not even able to get into a flow. And that statement is not venting. That is a precise, factual description of what 40 minutes of phantom foul calls does to a post player's ability to function at her natural level. The biggest recurring culprit was Letizia Amihire, who ran the same scheme repeatedly throughout the night. position herself close to Boston, initiate the absolute lightest possible contact, and then throw her body backward with maximum theatrical commitment. Ami here is listed at around 118 pounds. She is listed, meaning the visual when she goes flying after minimal contact from an interior post player of Boston's strength and physicality looks dramatic even when the basketball play is entirely clean. The refs kept falling for it, repeatedly, consistently, not as a one-time mistake on a bang-bang play, but as a pattern that unfolded across multiple possessions in the same half. Two of Boston's fouls came in rapid succession in the second quarter, and she spent the remainder of the first half on the bench. That is the direct consequence. 0 points, 2 rebounds in the entire first half from a player averaging 16 points and nearly 8 boards per game on the season. Before halftime even arrived, Ami here's flopping act had already cost Indiana their best interior presence when they needed her most. Here is what that cost actually looks like in basketball terms. With Boston unable to play freely or play at all, Indiana could not run the inside-out action that makes their offense go. The paint packed in. Every time Clark caught the ball on the wing, she was getting swarmed by multiple bodies with no interior threat to pull defenders away. Golden State's defensive philosophy, be physical, be disruptive, pack the paint, take away the left step back, works exponentially better when the player designed to punish that approach is sitting on the bench in foul trouble she did not earn. When you watch the charge calls in the first half and you see Ami here's feet still moving, her body already committing to the backward fall before contact is even made, you understand that those were not basketball plays. They were tactical performances. And the officiating crew on the floor at Chase Center, on May 28th, gave them a standing ovation every single time. And then came the fourth quarter. Game on the line. Indiana scrapping and clawing and refusing to go away, despite everything the first 3 quarters had thrown at them. Clark hit a three-pointer with just under 4 minutes to play, to pull Indiana within 80-81, and Boston followed it up with a jumper to put the Fever ahead. The building was tense. Golden State needed a stop, and then Veronica Burton threw an elbow directly into Caitlin Clark's face on an inbounds play. Not a hand in the face fighting for a loose ball. Not incidental contact on a drive through traffic. An elbow to the face on an inbounds play where Clark was not in an aggressive defensive posture. The referees reviewed it. They looked directly at it, and they called absolutely nothing. Not a flagrant, not a common foul. Nothing. Let me be very precise about what a flagrant foul call in that moment is worth, because this is not a footnote. At that point in the game, the Valkyries led 88-89, with 16 seconds remaining. A flagrant foul awards the fouled player 2 free throws and gives her team possession of the ball. That is free points plus the basketball at exactly the moment Golden State was trying to close the door on a 2-point game. Instead of getting that, Indiana got nothing. Clark stood there having just absorbed an elbow to the face in front of a packed building, in front of the broadcast cameras, and the referees swallowed the whistle. Valkyries coach Natalie Nakasi even challenged the call, which tells you everything. Even the winning team recognized this was a play that warranted a serious look. The refs gave it a serious look and still found nothing. Indiana lost a possession they desperately needed to either tie or take the lead, and the game ended 2 points later with Aliyah Boston's buzzer turnaround falling short. Now here is the detail that puts the entire officiating narrative in full perspective, and Dre is going to need you to sit with this one for a second. In this same game, Caitlin Clark was assessed a flagrant foul for a screen she set. The refs found a flagrant on Clark for setting a screen, and then they watched Veronica Burton drive an elbow into Clark's face during an inbounds play, and found no flagrant at all. That is not inconsistency. That is not a couple of bang-bang plays that could go either way. That is 2 calls in the same game, applying 2 completely different standards to 2 completely different players on 2 completely different actions, and getting both of them wrong in the same direction. Clark gets bodied more than almost any guard in this league, and the contact she absorbs consistently goes beyond what the whistle covers. That is not a new observation from one rough night at Chase Center. It is a pattern that stretches back across her entire professional career, and May 28th was simply the most glaring single-game example of it yet. Aaliyah Boston walked into that press conference, and she was done being polite about it. And I want you to understand something important about who Aaliyah Boston is, because it matters to the weight of what she said. This is not a player who flips tables and points fingers every time things go badly. She does not make scenes. She is meticulous, professional, and restrained in public at almost all times. Her instinct, even after bad losses, is to turn the criticism inward. When she fouled out in just 22 minutes in the second game of the season against the Sparks, Coach Stephanie White publicly went to bat for her, saying in her own post-game conference that Boston was getting called for all those, and she put air quotes around the word, fouls. That moment established a pattern. The officiating issues around Boston are not a one-game anomaly. They are a recurring organizational frustration. And on May 28th, after watching Aliyah flop her way into phantom charge calls across an entire first half, and then watching the refs swallow a flagrant on a play involving her teammate's face, Boston had seen enough. She sat at that table and she told the truth. That is what courage looks like in professional sports. Now let me give you the full picture of this game, because it would be unfair not to acknowledge what was genuinely good about Indiana's effort on that floor. The Fever were down 7 points after Golden State's opening quarter surge, came back to tie it at 44 at halftime, and refused to be blown out despite everything working against them. Their bench contributed 36 of their 88 total points. Sophie Cunningham scored 11 points. Michaela Timpson made defensive plays that do not show up in any box score but kept the deficit close enough for the fourth quarter to matter. And then there was Raven Johnson. Johnson, the 10th overall pick in the 2026 WNBA draft, playing just her 7th professional game, went out in 21 minutes against the best defensive team in the league, in a hostile road environment, and dropped a career-high 16 points on 70% shooting from the floor. She hit 2 of 3 threes. She led the entire Fever roster in box plus menace with a +4, meaning Indiana was measurably better when she was on the floor than when she was not, in a game that ultimately came down to 2 points. She was tied with Clark for the team's scoring lead, a rookie, in a hostile building, against a Valkyries defense that had spent the entire week preparing for Clark, Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, and everyone else on Indiana's roster by name. Johnson stepped into that environment and outplayed every single one of them in terms of efficiency. And after the game, she made her post-game podium debut for the first time this season, alongside Boston and head coach Stephanie White, saying she just takes it day by day and does whatever it takes to win. Dre's take: if Stephanie White is not finding Johnson more consistent minutes going forward, that is a rotation question that needs to be asked out loud and answered with evidence. Caitlin Clark's night was, as has been widely reported, her worst of the season. Statistically, 16 points, 6 assists, 3 steals, a perfect 8 for 8 from the free throw line, and 3 for 12 from the field in 29 minutes against a defensive scheme specifically designed around eliminating everything she is comfortable doing. The three-pointer she hit with 3:55 remaining to pull Indiana within one was one of the most important shots of the game. It was also the same kind of shot that makes Nikase's defensive blueprint necessary in the first place. But the bigger story of Clark's night is not the shooting numbers. It is what she absorbed to produce even those numbers. Burton pressed her from the opening tip for 40 minutes. 3 of Burton's career-high 5 blocks came against Clark directly. Clark had 5 turnovers, which is high, but consider the circumstances. Playing through a back issue, on the road, with Boston limited by foul trouble, meaning the help options were reduced all night, in a building built specifically to make everything harder. And then there was the record. In the middle of all of this chaos, the bad back, the Valkyries' physicality, the officiating inconsistency, Burton in her face all night, Caitlin Clark made the precise cross-court pass to Sophie Cunningham that became her 500th career assist, making her the fastest player in WNBA history to reach that milestone. She already owns the same record for reaching 1,000 career points. She set 2 all-time records during the worst game of her season while playing through a back injury on the road against the most physical team in the league. And the officiating crew at Chase Center gave her a flagrant foul for setting a screen. Indiana's free throw shooting, 90% as a team on the night, is the reason this game was even close enough for the Burton no call to matter. That discipline at the line, in the specific context of this game, was the thread that kept Indiana within striking distance during stretches when field goals were not falling, and the officiating was actively complicating the Fever's ability to run their offense. If Indiana gets blown out, the fourth quarter no call is just a bad moment in a forgettable game. They did not get blown out. They were 2 points away, so every wrong call, every phantom charge on Boston, every swallowed whistle in the fourth had direct measurable impact on the final result. Aliyah Boston already knew all of this when she sat down at that press conference table. She did not need to see the replay. She was there. She lived it. She picked up charge calls from a player whose feet were still moving. She watched the refs review a flagrant foul in real time and walk away with nothing. She watched Indiana lose by 2 points in a game that had at least one call, just one, that by the explicit language of the rulebook should have gone differently. And she said it. Without drama, without performance, without losing her composure. She said exactly what happened, and she sat there and let it land. The WNBA has a real officiating consistency problem. And this game is not an isolated incident, it is an accumulation. When the Fever lost their season opener against Dallas, Boston had officiating complaints then too. When she fouled out against the Sparks in Game 2, Stephanie White was questioning calls in front of reporters. The pattern is established. And when the league's officiating environment consistently fails to protect its players, when the rulebook says flagrant foul and the referee says nothing, when the rulebook says legal guarding position and the call goes the other way, it is not just unfair. It is a safety issue. It is a competitive integrity issue. And it is the kind of thing that makes players who are normally reserved, who are normally professional, who are normally diplomatic beyond what the moment requires, sit down at a press conference table in San Francisco and tell the truth. I'm Dre Fiver. Street hoops, no filter, all facts. If Aaliyah Boston deserves her flowers for speaking up when it mattered, smash that like button right now, and let's get this video in front of every single Fever fan who knows exactly what she was talking about. Drop your take in the comments. Do you think the refs cost Indiana this game? Or is this just the physical WNBA basketball both teams signed up for? I want every single one of those takes below. Subscribe to Street Hoops and turn on notifications because this Fever season is just getting started, and we are going to be covering every single moment of it without the sugarcoating. Street Hoops, always first, never filtered.